Hey guys, this is Jakob. I'm content manager and I'm helping small and medium enterprises with their content strategy. In my podcast, Content Marketing Mastery, I'm interviewing people who create great content and people who are coaches, who are in a coach niche or helping other people to become more efficient with the content that they create. And today I have a special guest. Welcome, Brian Bogert. Welcome, Brian. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm great. Thank you for the opportunity to join you. And like we were just talking about right before we started recording, man, you've been a huge supporter of the content I've been putting out lately, and I'm very grateful for our connection.
Yes, I appreciate your time and that we have this chance to speak and to share values and bring value to the world with this recording. Very happy.
Yeah.
Cool. Before we speak about content and content marketing, content creation and things like this, can you introduce yourself? So who are you and what's your passion?
Yeah, so Brian Bogert, I'm a human behavior and performance coach and speaker. And one of my biggest passions is really to help people get to the core of who they already are, their most authentic selves, by helping them increase their awareness and intentionality. You know, and you probably know this. We can unpack it now or later, but I've got a pretty unique story that kind of led me down this path as well, and some core lessons that I've extracted from it. But I'm currently on a mission to impact 1 billion lives over the next 25 years. And so that's what I'm very passionate about, having an impact in people's lives.
Yes. Let's jump directly into your personal story, because this is something that is very tight also in the content that you create, also the keynotes that you give. So can you give us maybe the not the longest version, the middle version of your story?
I'll give the middle version. Yeah, it'll be good. So I want everybody to just imagine walking out of a store after a successful shopping trip, walking to your car, turning your head and seeing a truck barreling 40 miles an hour right at you with no time to react. That's where this portion of my story begins. My mom, my brother, and I had gone to our local Walmart to get a 1-inch paintbrush. And as we were heading back to our car, I always had an excitement and vigor for life. And I really just wanted to get home and get that 1-inch paintbrush to use. So I was the first one to the car. This was back in the days before we had key fobs and we could unlock the car from a distance. It was when we had to still put the key in the door. So I'm standing there with my hand on the handle. And when this happened, there was a truck that pulled up in front of the store. Driver and middle passenger got out, and the passenger all the way to the right felt the truck moving backwards. So he did what any one of us would do. He moved over to put his foot on the brake, but he instead hit the gas. Combination of shock and force threw him up onto the steering wheel, up onto the dashboard, and before you know it, he was catapulting 40 miles an hour across the parking lot right at us with no time to react. Now, we were parked in an end spot. He went up and over the median, went up over the tree in the median, hit our car, knocked me down, ran over me diagonally, tore my spleen, left a tire track scar on my stomach, and continued on to completely sever my left arm from my body. So there I am on a 115-degree day in Phoenix, Arizona, laying on the asphalt with my arm 10 feet away. My mom and my brother just watched the whole thing happen. And so did my guardian angel. There was a nurse that walked out of the store right when this happened. And she saw the literal life and limb scenario in front of her and rushed immediately into action. She came over and stopped the bleeding on the wound and instructed some innocent bystanders to run inside, grab a cooler, and get my arm on ice within minutes. Had she not done one or both of those, I either wouldn't be with you today, or I'd be with you today with a cleaned up stump. And I know a lot of people were probably not expecting us to go there today, right? I have a very, very unique story. I'll expedite the rest of it. I had 24 surgeries, years of recovery. But what I've learned in all my time of doing this is that we all have unique stories.
Yes.
What's important is that we pause and become aware of the lessons we can extract from those stories, and then become intentional with how do we apply them into our lives. And we all have the ability to do that. And we all have the ability to tap into the collective wisdom and lessons from other people to shorten our own curve to learning. So I'll share with you 2 primary lessons. The first is I learned not to get stuck by what had happened to me, but instead get moved by what I could do with it. And the second, I didn't realize until far later. You see, I spent a lot of those post-accident years in a fog, but my parents certainly did not. They were extremely aware of the unceasing medical treatments, years of recovery. And they were also very aware of the idea that seeing their son grow up with the use of his left arm was a source of potential suffering for them. And so they literally willed themselves day in and day out to do what was necessary, what was tough, to strengthen and heal me. They literally embraced the pain of the process to avoid the suffering of seeing their son grow up without the use of his arm. And so it wasn't probably intentional, but what they did was ingrain in me a philosophy and a way of living, which was to embrace pain to avoid suffering. And when done right, this is also when people gain freedom. And so it's the same concept that I use to not only overcome this unique injury, but how my business partners and I built our last business from $250,000 to over 15 million in revenue in the span of a decade. And now how I flip that on its head as a human behavior and performance coach and speaker to be able to help other people become more aware, more intentional, and more of who they already are, their most authentic selves. People just like you, people just like the people watching this show today, is the folks that we're impacting today. Because when they do that, that's when the door starts to crack to perspective, motivation, and direction.
Yes, definitely. Very inspiring. So how old were you when this happened? So
I was 7.
7. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, my son is almost the exact same age I was when my accident happened. He turned 7 in a couple of months. And so within the next 3 months, he will be the exact age I was when my accident happened. And he's a little clone of mine. And so as a father, it's pretty interesting to like look and see. I mean, he literally looks just like I did. He acts a lot like I did. And it's very hard for me to then imagine myself as a father having that happen to my son. I'm happy that it happened to me, but I feel badly that my parents had to go through that whole process.
Yes. Wow. Very inspiring. So you said something very interesting. So when other people also have stories, but oftentimes they don't share it. So there are many people out there, I think, who have a story, but they think, well, it's not like this story. So it is not that big and that emotional. It is much smaller. And what advice would you give to these people when they don't want to share it with other people?
Yeah. So, I'm going to say if people don't want to share it, that's on them. I'm going to give that piece. But I think there's a lot of people who think that their stories don't matter. I think that's the root of what I really want to address, if that's okay. I think there's a lot of people who are like, oh, my story's not that important. It's not that big. It's just something that happened to me. It's not as profound, and here's the reality. And that's why I say that exact statement when I talk about my story. Mine is very big. It is extremely unique. But whether you are suffering from a divorce, financial loss, it doesn't have to be a physical trauma. It doesn't even have to be trauma. It could literally be a struggle and a story and ways that you overcame. The reality of it is we can all learn from our collective stories. And there will, no matter what, be people on this planet that will be able to identify or relate to your story in some way. Now, there's not a lot of people who can relate to getting a limb completely ripped off, but what I've learned from it and the other pieces of my journey are what people connect to, not the actual story, right? Because that's what's important, is what are the lessons that we can become aware of from our stories? And then how do we become intentional with how do we put them into our lives? And the reality of it is I think that stories are some of the best teachers we have. When I'm on stage, when I talk about content, you've been consuming some of the content I've been putting out recently. I tell stories, right? I don't give 7-step systems. I don't give like 5 steps to success. Like there's pieces of that ingrained in what I do, but it's stories that teach lessons more powerfully than almost anything else. So I would just encourage people who think that their story isn't worthy, their story isn't good enough, it's not that big of a deal. If it was a big deal to you, it's going to be a big deal to somebody else. And so don't worry about the comparison factor. Focus more on how do I learn and grow and help others learn and grow from what I've been through. That's the important piece.
Yes, I think that's very true when it comes to many people underestimate their own story. I think that's something that I'm hearing very often. So you already said it twice, intentionally. So when you reverse engineer this process, so to say, you said it was a lot of intention to get the story and to deliver it also to the way you did. So when you reverse engineer this process, what steps would you give other people, other entrepreneurs, so that they come back to this kind of story for themselves? What advice would you give?
Yeah. So by the way, I also think it's interesting. I'm gonna make one comment and then I'm gonna answer the question. There was a long time I didn't think my story mattered.
Really? Okay.
Right. There was a long time I didn't think I could use my story to help other people. And I've been on stages since I was 7 years old. And I don't say that to impress. I say that to impress on the point. Like I was literally on stages because my story was unique and I was from a very young age. And there was still a lot of times where I felt like my story wasn't that important or it wasn't that big of a deal. And so often I never led with my story. So often I would have friends for 5, 6, 7 years who would never know about my accident, my injury, my arm at all, because it wasn't something that was like talked about a whole lot. It just was something that was a part of me. And so the reason I say that is I have a crazy unique story that I obviously have learned how to tell in a way that can have true impact. But I want to just say, for anybody who thinks their story isn't that important, that big of a deal, mine's one of the most unique I've ever heard. And again, I don't say that to impress. I say it to impress upon the point. And I still didn't think it was worthy. So there's a mental and emotional shift that we've got to move through. That's the first place.
Yes,
we have to recognize that what we've been through has made us who we are, and who we are is the gift to this world that we can then expand upon. And so you picked up on the word intentional, but what starts before intentional is aware, right? Awareness. So awareness is the first step. And that's what I say. So when we reverse engineer, whether or not you're getting into a place where you actually want to tell your story yet, the first step is to at least pause and pay attention to what are the stories that have been formative in your life. What are those moments of struggle that you've been through? What are those moments of victory you've been through? What are those moments of joy you've been through, right? That literally have shaped your life. Because we all have those, every one of us. None of us get through this life unscathed, positively or negatively. Like, we will experience both spectrums of that side. And so look back on your life and take toll on what are those stories. Once you have a list of those stories, right, those moments in your life that happened, whether or not you can tell them as a story, just look at what happened. What was the event? How did it take place? Who was involved? What are the actual tactical elements of this process and this event that were formative? Then look real time into that event and situation, and then look a few years ahead or a couple of months ahead, if that's all you have, and legitimately look at, how did I grow from this story? What did I learn from it? How did it shape me? How did it impact me? What changes in behavior did I actually take place? Did it change how I interact with people? Like, I would literally look, because often, right, we say that nothing happens by coincidence, and there's a lesson in everything that we apply. But if we don't take the time to go back and look, what is the actual lesson? It's lost.
Yes.
Once we've done those two steps, then you can become intentional with not only applying it actively into your real life, but become intentional with, how do you structure a story that's going to be told in a meaningful way, so that not only you can reflect back on it and connect to those lessons that you extracted in those formative moments, but also use them as teaching moments for other people.
Yes, very powerful. And yeah, there were many things that you mentioned that I like, these ideas. But when it comes now, when you create your content, for example, you have this beautiful video background, and how intentionally do you tell your story as a part of yourself? So is it something that you always tell, and then in a shorter version? And when it comes to a keynote, it is the long version. So how do you choose this for yourself?
Yeah, I think it's all about context and like, what's the audience and what's the purpose, right? So I think there will be times that I'll embed my story as like literally almost a sentence, where it's like, I was run over by a truck, my arm was ripped off, right? There's a slightly more robust version than that. There's a version that I just told, which is often a similar platform that I tell on these types of venues, right? Like podcasts and different types of audiences, where we can compress it in 3 minutes or less, so that it's more of a soundbite. People can capture the whole story, but they get enough context to understand it. And then, yes, to your point, when I give a keynote, whether it's live or virtual, I often tell that story in a much longer form, and I give different elements to the story than what we heard today. Because you have to imagine, with as crazy as this story is, the 3-minute version that I told today, or roughly however long it was, right, there's a lot of details missing. Right. And there's a lot of details that actually are formative and meaningful as it relates to like stories and movement in that story. And so I tell it completely differently from stage. What's interesting too, is when I tell it from stage, and again, I'm going to call that virtual or live, that's the one place that I tell the story third person. I actually don't tell it first person. And I tell it third person about a story about a mom and 2 boys and this injury on a boy. And then I have a reveal moment. And the reason I do that is because it actually draws people in, because I'm telling the story as if it's not about me. And then I have a moment that I literally transition, and I've got a very physical, intentional way that I draw out like that this story was about me, and it sucks the audience in. And I do that because it is such a unique story that hearing someone tell it from the third person also makes it more relatable for people in the room. And then when they realize that it's me, there's a stronger connection to the rest of the keynote talk. Okay. And I've learned that over years. I used to always tell it first person. This was a shift I made probably 5 years ago, and it materially changed the way I connected with audiences.
But how do you, I mean, did you made an A/B test, or how do you notice that the connection?
So I had told my story
stronger?
in first person so many times that the very first time I told it in third person, literally it took one time of doing it, it's like the air got sucked out of the room. Okay. There was a completely different feeling, because when I tell it in first person, people see it, they're experiencing, they're tracking along, it is what it is. But like the story, particularly when you add more details, they're connected, it moves people, it's emotional. But when I do a reveal moment, it literally, like, and again, I'm not saying this like I'm a great storyteller by any means. I'm just saying this like I firsthand saw the difference the very first time I told the story. It was like the air got sucked out of the room and people were like in shock. And what's fascinating to me is my arm is shorter, it's smaller, it's different. I'll be telling the story on stage, often in short sleeves, about a kid who lost his arm. And the majority of the audience never connects it's me until I have a reveal moment, because they just don't notice.
Interesting, right?
And then all of a sudden you get to see them honing in on my arm. Like the air gets sucked out of the room, and then all of a sudden it's like the whole room starts focusing on my arm. It's just a different feel and a different delivery. I learned that technique though from a book. And then one of my original coaches, who's also a very, very good storyteller, one of the best I've ever heard, he was talking about moments to bring people into stories and have reveal moments that give those moments that people experience. So instead of a 5 to 10 minute dialogue around a story, what they're going to remember is that moment. Like, oh man, Brian was telling this story, and all of a sudden I connect the dots that it was him.
Yeah. Yeah. What's the book called? What's the name of the book?
I knew you were going to ask me that as soon as I said it. It's called Resonate by Nancy Duarte. And when I turned around to look at the book on my shelf, I'm sure my camera just blurred out, but it's Resonate by Nancy Duarte. And what she really does is she talks about like how to create imagery in content, in presentations, in talks. She talks about ways to connect with audience. And so, you know, I think I've always had a natural gift for gab and talking and telling stories, but I've also been a student of my industry because I want to refine my own craft to make sure that whenever I have an audience, I can have the greatest amount of impact possible.
Yes, I mean, that's all about, it's all about connections, building connections. And 100%. You do this with your story, and you do it in a brilliant way, I think. And
thank you.
We have to learn from you. Would love to see you on stage.
I can learn from anybody who's listening, I'm sure. So yeah, I mean, if you guys can take some nuggets from me, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. But you know, I'm just a guy who's happened to live a lot of life, and I'm taking it one day at a time, and hopefully given the ability for you to learn from my stories, and I get the opportunity to learn from you as well.
That's cool. So you mentioned something, you're also giving virtual keynotes at the moment because of COVID. Okay.
Yeah.
And are there any changes that you recognize, and that you or lessons that you learned in the last couple of months through COVID-19? So presenting virtual, I mean, the connection, you don't have an audience in front of you. It's different. You look into a camera. So do you have some lessons from this process or from virtual events?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, I mean, you commented on my studio and my nice setup. That was one of the first things I did after COVID hit, was shift the way I did things. And it's been through a couple of different evolutions. So I'll talk about that first, and then I'll talk about some of the lessons that I've kind of extracted, because it's partially technology, partially like application as well. So when I first started doing it, all I did was the camera, and I was still working on a 27-inch iMac, and I had a different background it was just kind of the backdrop of my room. It wasn't an actual like studio setup. And so then I started to evolve from there, and I was like, you know, I need to get a backdrop. I need to make sure that I've got things set up appropriately. You know, that's a real shelf. When you and I last talked, you asked me that. I went back and picked a book up off of the shelf, right? I didn't want a virtual background. I wanted my technology to help differentiate me, because I look at life and it's like, life is all about how you show up, right? The first thing is that you show up. The second thing is, how do you show up? Like, how present, how active, how engaged are you? And this was no different to me. And so I started with the camera, and then I was working with the camera, but I was sitting, you know, 2-3 feet from a 27-inch iMac. And that was fine. But in my coaching work, I'm going to speak to that as well, because it connects to the speaking pieces also. I read people, right? I read micro expressions. I read facial expressions. I read body language. I can pick up on all those different things. Even on a 27-inch iMac, it wasn't the same as in person or even close to it, right?
Yes,
and so I was missing things and it wasn't as effective. And so one of the evolutions of my studio was a change in the lens on my nice camera. And so I ended up getting a lens it's called the Nifty 50. So anybody who's watching this, right, will know what this 50 mm lens is with Canon. But what it essentially does, my background is 6 to 7 feet behind me. My camera is 7 feet in front of me. And you are on a 50-inch television that's 6 to 7 feet in front of me. That was one of the biggest lessons I learned, both for coaching and for speaking, is two things. One, you look like you're sitting across the table from me right now. You're life size. You're not on a small screen. You're life size. And I feel like I'm across the table having a conversation with you. So I feel like the ability to transfer energy and have a conversation just by changing the technology setup was material. That translates also to speaking though, because that's one of the things that I learned is, we'll break this down in just a second, but virtual keynotes are delivered in a multitude of different ways, right? There literally is live stream where you are speaking essentially on a Zoom platform or some other platform, but you're kind of speaking to a screen that you're just looking at yourself. Then there's virtual keynotes where you might be in a Zoom setting like that, but you get to actually see the participant grid. So you can see people real time on the screen and you get to get that feedback and interaction and energy exchange. Not the same as in person, but as close as you would get otherwise. And then there's pre-recorded virtual keynotes. Okay. Pre-recorded are my least favorite because there's no feedback. There's none, right? There's no live questions. There's no anything. You pre-record, you do it. Now I've done a bunch of them, but that's not, they're my least favorite. There's no interaction. There's no interaction. Yeah. The next one that is probably my next least favorite, but it's probably my second favorite because there's only 3 options really right now, is the one where you're talking, but you don't see the audience. Yeah. Why I like that one at least better than the pre-recorded is there can still be chat polls. There can still be stuff that comes in. There can still be real life interaction to answer questions afterwards. So there's some level of engagement, even if I can't see the people, that I know that there's some feedback. The last one is my favorite. And that's one of the lessons that I learned with this is I have the ability, because you're on a 50-inch screen, if I get a grid, even if there's 50 or 100 people on there, I don't need to see everyone in the audience. I can get as many people on the screen as possible. But what's beautiful about that is I have a lot of latitude because I'm so far away from my camera where I can look in different parts of the screen and you can barely detect that I'm moving my eyes. It looks like I'm looking at you the whole time. It looks like I'm engaged with you the whole time. If I was sitting at my 27-inch iMac 3 feet from the screen, every eye movement you'd pick up on. And so it allows me to come across as more engaged to each individual person on those things. So that was one of the lessons I learned because to me, that's as close as you get to being on stage where you can have that impact. And so technology though, I invested in it. I spent the money. I literally have a rolling studio cart. I invested in setting up the backdrop. I bought all the stuff that's back there. I've got a 5-light setup. And again, I don't say any of that to draw any attention to it other than I made the investment and it paid for itself in one talk. I booked one talk early on. And the biggest reason I got it, it was down to a finalist between 2 of us. I landed the talk because my technology was better. Our messages were great, but they said our teams are going to see you, absorb you, and connect with you better because you're crisp, you're clear, you have good lighting, you have good sound, and we're going to be able to interact with you better on our end. Yes. And so it paid for itself in one talk.
Okay. So the lesson that I got is you have to be good with your messaging, your communication skills, but also you have to figure out the technology thing. So all the things that you mentioned, that's,
Well, and how are you interacting with people in a virtual capacity? Because the technology is important, but the specifics on how you set up the technology is where I wanted to extract the lesson, right? Because you're so far away from me, because I can see that, people absorb me better, but I also can absorb them better. Right. And so it's not just the technology, because I could have had the camera and the setup and just been running it on a normal computer, but literally, how are you spacing yourself from your screen? How big is the screen? How are you able to consume the content? Like those are what we have to adapt to in the virtual world that we're in right now. And so that's what I would encourage people on. That's the lesson I learned, which took me a few months to learn through trial and error. Like now I have this setup, it's dialed, it works. I'm not changing it at this moment because it's accomplished all of those areas where I was deficient before.
Yes. So when you talked, I remembered these scenes from the event of Tony Robbins, where he has multiple walls, and he saw 200, 300 people at the same time and speaking to them. That was also very impressive.
Yeah, but that's what he was doing, is he wanted to short circuit the system so that he could see his audience. And he did that in a live virtual studio, which is another way people are doing it. So I've built out my own, so it works pretty well. But for someone like Tony Robbins, right, he's the biggest of the biggest in the space as it relates to like audience and following and all those things. You know, he's going to go rent out a whole studio to be able to do that thing. Now, the cost on that's going to be prohibitive for many people. So I think what I'm suggesting is you could spend $3,000 to $5,000 and have your own setup, your own studio, and be able to deliver really high quality content and interact with your audience in a more effective way than just sitting on a computer.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you already mentioned it several times when it comes to content creation. So the interaction with the audience is very important, but also the topics. So how do you come up? Because this is something that many people struggle with. I don't know topics. I don't know what to write about or to shoot my video about. So do we have a strategy, or how do you come up with content ideas?
Yeah, so and I look at content in multiple different mediums, right? Because we've got video content, we have audio content, we've got written content. And so I think I look at those in slightly different lenses. No pun intended there. But it's one of those things where, you know, for articles in particular, I look at articles, and the ones that we write, the ones that have been published in Forbes and other things, have been really around a structure on like, where is an area of expertise that I have, either working with clients, overcoming something myself, something with study in human behavior or performance. And how can we create like a longer form piece of content that can actually give like actionable tools that somebody can read and consume in a different way, right? People read and consume differently than how they watch and consume or hear and consume. And so, you know, we'll write the content. I work with a copywriting team to be able to help like take my thoughts and put them into some sort of a structure. They're still my words, my thoughts, my lessons. I don't outsource the content. But what I do have is I help people translate what I do best, which is communicate verbally, so either audio or video, and make sure that I'm capturing it in the best way for people to consume in a written format. And those, you know, we've done, I don't know how many articles now. We've probably done less than 20 articles, 15 to 20 articles, but those take a lot more structure, right? It's like a concept, and then we build out different pieces behind it. Then we have to backfill with some research. Then we have to like work with the copywriting team. And so that's the longest piece of investment. But what's great about those is they can be repurposed into short video formats. They can be repurposed into talks. They can be repurposed into, you know, blog posts. And so those are all like that's a piece of content that we can repurpose multiple times. Audio, I don't do any audio or like only content, but I take other types of content and extract audio so that we can do that. So I'll answer the audio and the video content kind of in the same way. You know, we've got a few different ways that we do that. We've got some longer form content that gets built into courses and things that's captured on video. And those, I would say, follow more of a structure similar to an article, where we want to make sure that we've got a really thoughtful process for leading people through a concept, giving them actionable tools, giving them things to think about. And those are going to be, you know, 10 to 20 minute videos that might be embedded in a course or might be shared through some of our insider groups. Those will inherently have more structure behind them that might be similar to a longer form podcast or an actual talk. And those will take a lot more time, energy, and attention to produce, make sure that we've got it dialed in. But I also don't want to make it seem like it's something that's way more difficult than it is. There are literally sometimes I'll just turn on the camera and start talking for a 9 to 20 minute piece of content as well, because if it's something I know I've talked about often, I think sometimes having it just be completely raw and organic is going to be consumed the best because it's the most authentic delivery.
Yes.
I don't ever script anything. I don't ever read off teleprompters. I don't ever memorize talks. You'll hear, like, I tell certain stories often enough that they'll sound similar, but if you really dig into the stories, there's going to be different words here and there. I don't have that stuff scripted and memorized. And it's the same thing even for the longer form videos. The short form videos, which I create 1-minute videos that I put on social stuff for stories and reels and things, those are 100% freestyle. Like it's in the moment, I turn on the camera, it is what it is. And then there's Bogert's Bullets, which is a 3 to 5 minute piece of content that comes out once a week. Those used to have a lot more structure to them, meaning I would literally think about the topic. I would find a credible quote. I would think about the structure, like where is it at? What's the lesson I want to teach? What's the close and the call to action? And in my early days, that they had more structure. They took more time. They took more energy. Now I have been speaking and doing this for so long. I don't even go to that level of effort with it. It will literally be a concept. And I will get a concept and I'll set up my studio and I'll turn on the camera and I will start talking. And I just basically drop 3 to 5 minutes of content on that topic right there. And then it goes off to my content editor and he will put his magic on it with the branding and all those things. And so it's evolved to a point where I've done it enough that I can turn the camera on and just do it. But in the early days, and this is, I think, to the point that you were getting at, how do people go about building content? I would say look at topics that you have relevance and credibility in, meaning you either personally experienced it or people in your professional life or that you've worked with have experienced it and that you can tell some sort of lesson as a result of it. And I would, similar to how I talked about my Bogert's Bullet structure, I would think about concept. I would think about lead in. I would think about what are the key points I want to accomplish and what's the call to action or the close in a short form version that's going to have the greatest amount of impact. And I think if you go through that type of structure for any type of short form video, you're going to be on the right path. And then the last piece is trust and surrender, right? Like trust yourself that you know what it is and surrender to the process. You're going to screw up. You're going to have multiple takes. You're going to like just have multiple cuts in editing, especially in the beginning. But the more you do it, just like anything in life, the easier it will get. I can drop a 3 to 5 minute video typically on one take with no cutting anymore. But that wasn't the case early on. I would have to like do 2 or 3 takes, or I'd pause and I'd have to cut a few different clips together. That's okay.
That's where we all start. And I think this is sometimes, I think when it comes to digital tools and social media, everybody thinks it's like in the Matrix, that you just upload all the wisdom and the knowledge and the experience and that you can do everything. But it's a skill and you have to practice it. That's the most important thing. And
practice it.
Especially when it comes to video producing on camera. That's very important.
So literally though, go back and look at my early Bogert's Bullets. Like look at the first 5 to 10, watch them. The content was pretty good. The delivery was horrible. It was all fabricated. I had to learn how to give my energy. Like they were off the charts. It was too much. For people who didn't know me, they liked it. But the people who knew me were like, whoa, bro, like you're way better live than you are on camera, right? And so I say that because it's like, go back and look. I leave them up on the website because it's a part of the process, right? They weren't perfect, but I did it anyway. And I think that's the message here is turn the camera on, start talking, and put it out into the world. You will refine and get better the more you do it.
Yeah, that's really, that's it basically. Just start the camera and start recording. I also remember my first videos were also very awful.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't met a single person whose first videos were great out of the gate.
Yeah.
Like it just.
Yes, that's just nature. So one thing is very interesting, one shots. So this is also something that I learned from Brian Bogert, that you shoot the video like when you deliver a keynote, you don't have chances to get back and say something in a different way. You deliver your message, and if there's a moment where you're not focused, that's it. You don't have a second chance. And why don't you figure it out like the same way on camera, so that you produce one shots, that you just have this one bullet and nothing else. And when you produce videos with this mindset, it becomes much better in the long term.
Yeah, and then it translates to your live skills as well. Yeah. I couldn't agree with that more. I think that that's exactly the case. And you know, if you even watch some of my last 10 videos, there's a couple of them where I make a mistake and I like call it out in the post editing, right? I'll mispronounce a word or something and I didn't even realize it until my editor went in and started working on it, you know, and it's like, and we make a joke about it because we're human, right? On stage, I make mistakes. Like we make mistakes, roll with it. Don't get caught up in it. And just, you know, it's not that big of a deal. And I think you're exactly right. Like that's part of the reason I do one take now on Bogert's Bullets. It is what it is. I don't even rewatch them anymore. I used to watch them, nitpick them, critique them, edit them. Now I'm at the point where my content guy, literally, I send it off. Once I film it, I never watch it. I just send it off. He does all the editing, sends me the raw file, and we get everything uploaded. I never watch it again. So I don't know if it was good or not until people start giving comments.
Yeah, I think at one point you have to decide yourself is just give it like it is and be in the flow and deliver your message.
Yeah, that's right.
Cool. So you also have coaching groups. Can we speak a little bit about that one? So you are coaching coaches, so to say, or just explain what you are exactly doing? That would be interesting.
So I describe myself as a human behavior and performance coach. I primarily work with entrepreneurs, business owners, executives, high performing salespeople, and often folks that have already reached a high level of success, but they're feeling stuck, stymied in their efforts to fill their potential. That's in the one-to-one category. And then we have group coaching as well as a self-led version that's really designed for anybody with a growth mindset who's looking to invest in themselves and become a better version of themselves. So we have a self-led version that's the core basics of all of our coaching philosophies. It's got video embedded, additional content embedded, the ability for them to just kind of take themselves on an intrinsic journey, but with no external eye.
Yes.
Group coaching is a modified version between that and one-to-one, where there's going to be 4 group coach sessions in between. So there's still a lot of self-led structure, but there's the opportunity to then get feedback not only from our team of coaches, but also from the other participants in there, as well as built-in accountability with the team and community, because people are going through this process together. We do that both for individuals who just want to join into our next group coaching cycle. We do that also for organizations where we literally go in and the group is the organization, the people they've identified that they want to go through that. So in those cases, it's particularly unique because they're all looking at things through the same challenges, the same blind spots. And then there's the one-to-one coaching. So I take people, all of our thoughts take people onto an intrinsic journey, help get back to the core of who they are. It helps them focus on the who, and then the what follows the who. The what becomes a manifestation of the who. So we take them through the intrinsic journey first, and then we give them lots of structure as well as strategy and tactics to start applying into their lives. But it's essentially individualistic. So if you took the course, if one of your business partners took the course, if your spouse took the course, it's going to look different for each one of you, because the whole point is don't do these 10 things to be successful. It's about helping people understand how to become successful with who they are and the way that they're going to operate in the world. And then it becomes a life of alignment that becomes self-regulating over time.
That sounds fantastic. Cool. And people register, and they are in some kind of back end where they have where they can watch the video sessions or video material.
Yep. For the self-led and the group coaching, yes, it's a course. It's built out on one of the platforms. Yes, they've got a back end platform, gives all the content, gives all the structure, gives all the questions they need to kind of evaluate and dig through. There's video content that supports all of it, even in the group coaching platform, because there's still a self-led portion in the group coaching side. And then our team makes ourselves available on any platform to help answer questions.
Cool. And what are the struggles that they have? Because you said they have same struggles and things they struggle with. What are these things?
Some of the things that we most often see people get stuck with or struggle with. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. Yes.
What I've found, and this was the case in my prior life, I'm going to speak more to my one-to-one coaching work, because that's where I've got the most exposure to see what the trends are. We see it in the other 2 platforms as well, but we're not necessarily in the weeds of every single piece. But with the one-to-one work, what's very, very obvious, I was running in circles with people making multiple 6 figures, 7 figures, and they were just miserable, right? Yeah. They had started their life really focusing on the what car, the what house, the what job, the what money, the what spouse, right? All these things, and they lost the who along the way. And so what most of them are struggling with is some combination of emotional triggers, behavioral patterns, and environmental conditioning from either upbringing or current state that's keeping them stuck in the self-defeating path. So one of the things that was surprising to me as we started to unpack and realize some of these things, the amount of shame that high performers operate under and often don't even know exists is astounding. There's often things like self-worth, scarcity mindsets, fear mentalities, things that we don't just talk about from a tactical standpoint, like here's what it is and how to move through it. we take a very individualistic approach for people to get to the root of what those things are, move them into a conscious level of awareness so that in the moments that they're triggered by those patterns in their life, that they can pause in those moments and choose a different path. And so a lot of it is not about the strategy and tactics keeping them stuck where they are. It's actually about helping them break through those things that have kept them in that self-defeating path. Once they do that, once they align with who they are, then we layer on top of it strategy and tactics with our philosophies around business and how to actually build audience, how to put things into customer language, how to create unique and different experiences, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we have to start with the who first, because then the what becomes a manifestation of the who, and the strategy and tactic can support the person that's delivering them versus, you know, it's like giving you a recipe and expecting you to be a chef, right? If I gave you a bunch of strategy and tactics, but we didn't get to the core of who you were and give you the tools and the skill sets to be a chef, it wouldn't matter what the recipe is, right? So it's the same philosophy with the way that we coach.
Cool. Sounds great. It's cool. So in the preparation, because this was something that we spoke about before the interview. Yeah. So I saw some of your stories and also your kids. You include them also into your stories. And I asked myself, okay, is he teaching some entrepreneurial skills to his children? And if yes, how? So because I also have a little son, so that would be interesting also for me. Do you?
Yeah, so I wouldn't call it entrepreneur skills. I would call it life skills, but we're super intentional about them, right? So, and I think that those things apply holistically. And that's just like generally our philosophy. So yes, you know, both of my kids have been doing I am statements from the time they could talk. And an I am statement is an answer to who are you question, right? So I could say, who are you? And you can answer that question based on who you are today and the things you've already done, or based on who you want to become and the things you want to accomplish. Both are equally powerful. And so literally since the time my kids have been talking, we've been doing I am statements like I am strong, I am worthy, I am brave, I am capable, right? Cool. And we've got certain statements that we say every morning before we go to school. And, you know, it was pretty cool because my son, when he was in preschool, we picked him up from preschool, and that was one of the exercises that they did in his class. And his teacher came up to me as I was picking him up and said, "You won't believe what happened today." I was like, "What?" She said, "We always ask people to just complete the statement, I am." And she said, "And 4 and 5-year-olds completely struggle with this." And she said, "But not your son. Your son rattled off, I am strong, I am brave, I am kind, I am unlimited, I am the manifestation of my thoughts. I am," like, he literally rattled off like 6. And she was like blown away. And I just got a smile on my face. And I said, "Yeah, we've been doing I am statements since he was like born." And I said, "So it probably is second nature." So yeah, we do those things. We do a whole lot around growth versus fixed mindset stuff in our house. You know, so we focus a lot on the process versus the outcome, because I think that's really what it is, whether we call it entrepreneurial or life lessons, right? Whenever we can focus on the process versus the outcome, one, we can't control. The process we can, but the outcome as well, like, might change or be materially different regardless of what the process looks like. And so what we reward is, instead of our kids being smart or getting an A on a paper, or, right, we reward the work they've put into the process, right? So if one of our kids is struggling with something, and I tell them all the time, I don't care if you come home with F's on everything. I don't care if you fail, as long as I know you've given your 100% effort. If you give 100% of your effort in anything, I will always have your back. I will always support you. I will always be behind you. Yeah. It's where you don't give your effort that I don't care. I don't care if you succeed or fail. If I don't think you're giving it your all, I don't care. Like, it's not, and that might sound harsh, but the reality of it is, what I'm trying to get them to understand is, we get out of life what we put into it. Right? And if we have a growth mindset, then we realize that we can grow and evolve based on the variables in the world. If we have a fixed mindset, then it's based on who we are. So the outcome of anything defines who we are versus what we can learn and grow to become. So we focus a lot on that. And then with my son in particular, you know, he's on the autism spectrum. And so he's got anxiety and stress and different things that enter into his world anyway. Fear is one of those things that can cripple him. And so one of the things that we've worked a lot with him on is, like, he will literally create something to be so big in his head that's really not that complicated. And so we talk to him a lot about how all the greatest things in life are on the other side of fear. Fun's on the other side of fear, freedom's on the other side of fear, fulfillment's on the other side of fear. And so in those moments when he hesitates, you know, you watch this video of me doing mountain biking with him. The first few times we did it, we'd get to the top of a hill and he'd need to descend, and he literally wouldn't go down it. He didn't want to. He was afraid. What if I crash? What if it's too steep? And then all we had to do was start to give him the structure to understand, and when I started working with him with mountain biking, we broke down all the fundamentals into individual techniques and skill sets. And then we started stringing them together. And so then when he got to the top of the mountain, I was like, oh yeah, so you remember how we did this with your pedals? Remember how we did this with your weight distribution? Remember how we did this around the corner? Remember how we did this? Yeah. You know how to do it all. So all you have to do is let go of the brake and trust the process and let the bike do the work. Right. And so the more he's done it, now he doesn't hesitate anymore. So we in our household look for, similar to the stories that we talked about earlier, we look for all those things, both my wife and I, as teaching moments, right? If I lose my temper and I raise my voice at my kids or my wife, which I'm never proud to do, but I admit happens to me sometimes, I'm human, right? I use that as a teaching moment to tell my kids hey, I'm sorry, daddy lost it. It's not your fault. I'm not upset with you. I'm not upset with mom. It was the things that happened in my day that I allowed to control me. And I said, and it's my responsibility to take ownership for that when I screw up. Right. So it's we use their own life experiences and then we use our own vulnerability to teach those lessons, because that's where it starts, is as kids, man.
That's cool. Like it. Really like it. It's cool. It's a different mindset. So never thought about that one. Thank you for sharing.
ReRead Mindset by Carol Dweck. It really breaks down the growth versus the fixed mindset. And there's a whole section at the back. So even if you did nothing else in the book, but you just read this back section, it's literally a whole section that's dedicated to parents, teachers, and coaches. And it talks about language that we can use that really supports or breaks down the fixed versus growth mindset philosophy. And it talks about ways that we can integrate that every day as parents in the way that we show up. I read that book when my oldest was 1. So this is probably 6 years ago. And it changed the way my wife and I parented, because it changed the language that we talked about in front of our children constantly, so that we could find ways to encourage and support their path to growth versus the outcome of what happened.
Interesting. Cool. I will check the book. So do you have something to share? So one idea or some lessons that you have that you want to share that we didn't spoke about? Is there something?
Yeah, it's actually a topic I've been working around more in my head. I'll probably be releasing a bullet on it here in this next week, so it's something I'll share with you. You guys will get it.
Cool.
You guys will get it real. Whether depending on when this goes live, you'll see this. But it's this idea of, and I've said this for a long time, but the terminology is now changing. I think everything begins and ends with you, right? And so when we realize that the good things that happen to us and the bad things that happen to us begin and end with us as well. So it's this concept of shifting from the victim mentality to the ownership and accountability mentality, right? And so many people who've been how did you move through what you've done? And I talked about I learned not to get stuck by what happened to me, but instead get moved by what I could do with it. And so the reality of it is this concept that I'm playing with is that we all have the ability to be our own savior, right? We don't need to rely on somebody else to pick us up. We don't need to rely on somebody else to pull us along. If we actually center and really connect with the fact that we are our own saviors, we can and will be our own saviors, then we are the ones who are going to be responsible for the outcomes in our life, good, bad, or indifferent. And so I would just ask anybody who's listening today to really take toll on your life and look at, hey, am I in a victim mentality? Do I place blame on other people for where I'm at, what's happening? Do I feel like life is fate and it's just happening to me? Or do I feel like I can influence and control that? And once you have the answer to that question, then you apply the lens of, okay, what if I was my own savior? What if I was my own savior? What would I be able to do if I could fix these problems, if I could put myself in the best position to succeed? And so that's what I want to leave people with. Are you your own savior? And if you're not, how do you become it?
Powerful. Cool. Like it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. My last question. So who would you recommend for my podcast?
Given the theme of your show, there's a guy by the name of Pablo Gonzalez, who's based in Florida, and his business partner, Isar, and I always mispronounce his last name, it's Isar Midas, but they have done a really, really good job of not only creating and distributing their own content, but I've been calling Pablo the world-class hype man, because he's done a really good job of being able to capture sound bites from other people and repurpose content that he's distributing on his channel that's actually highlighting and promoting other people. So he's, I think, doing that. He's one of the best in the game at doing that right now, at least that I've seen. And so from a content strategy standpoint, he I think would be a really, really good fit for your show. And they both have really interesting lessons as well. I'd be happy to connect you with both of them.
That would be cool. Yeah, I know the content of Pablo. Yeah, he's doing
have
great.
Have you talked to Pablo?
No, not in person. So no
I'll
Zoom
get you
calls.
connected to him because he should be on your show, man. He's a stud.
Yeah, that would be cool. Really. Yeah. Okay, Brian, thank you very much. I think there were many valuable lessons for the listeners. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for creating a platform to help people understand that their stories matter and content is king.
Yes. Thank you. See you next time.
See ya.